So this bottle is part of a collection of wines that was given to me by my Uncle Bob.
Uncle Bob.
Who's like famous in like our hemisphere, because anytime you eat and drink with us, like if a really nice bottle comes out, we have not purchased it from anywhere. It has been given to us by this famous Uncle Bob, who's not actually my uncle, but was...
Oh, he's not?
No. And I mean, I think you're actually tapping into something, especially for this particular... For what the core of this podcast is in terms of women, that I think there are actually a lot of us out there who have fallen into this role because our partners have this thing, you know? And sometimes that's great. But I think one of the things that we're trying to do is to reach out to people who are like just having the seed of interest in wine and try to bring them in and say, this is a wine that's really approachable right now and exciting and fun. And, you know, let it be, hopefully have that wine be a kind of spark for them going forward.
Renee Saint-Amour is the co-owner and female half of Hundred Suns, one of the fastest rising stars in the Oregon wine scene, producing classic and non-traditional wines from the Willamette Valley and the Rocks District. Their Gamay was just named number 3 in the top 50 wines by VinePair, and their 2022 Own Rooted Pinot Noir was named Wine of the Vintage by Decanter. They consistently get incredible reviews from Jancis Robinson, James Suckling, The Wine Advocate, and more.
Thank you so much for being here. This has been one of the conversations I've been looking forward to the most because you're one of my very favorite people.
Oh, I'm so excited too.
And I've known you, I guess now, since right when I moved back to Portland in 2016. I want to say we sold like your first vintage release of Hundred Suns. Was that in 2016?
It would have been, probably early 2017, because we started in 2015. But I remember it really well, going into the shop and meeting you. And it's kind of funny to go all the way back to that because that was such a scary time for me. I was doing something by going and trying to sell these wines and visiting accounts that I was so out of my comfort zone doing. And so I can't tell you what it meant to me to have, like, very early on, meet people in the marketplace who are friendly, unassuming, not jerks about, you know, asking me all sorts of crazy sommelier questions that I did not know the answer to. I just found a lot of friendly faces, and you guys were definitely one of them. And so that I owe you a gratitude for that I have never paid.
Well, I would never have known that you were nervous, or, I mean, I was also pretty new in the industry, and we'll talk about kind of like how you got more and more involved on the wine side of things. But I guess just to start off, would you tell us what special bottle you brought, and we can like sip while we walk down memory lane?
That would be very comforting. So today I brought with me a bottle of 1993 Chateau Montelena Cab.
No big deal.
Well, this is part of the story, and I was really trying to think about what the story was with the wine that I wanted to bring. And the story is actually not so much about this wine as where this wine came from. So this bottle is part of a collection of wines that was given to me by my Uncle Bob.
Uncle Bob.
Who's like famous in like our hemisphere, because anytime you eat and drink with us, like if a really nice bottle comes out, we have not purchased it from anywhere. It has been given to us by this famous Uncle Bob, who's not actually my uncle, but was...
Oh, he's not?
No. He was a dear family friend of ours when I was growing up. And I grew up in a home where wine was not particularly important to my family. My mother is half Chinese, half Japanese. There was not a big culture of wine in our family growing up. And so my Uncle Bob didn't have children of his own, and was a wine lover extraordinaire, and just kind of in the time when I was growing up was falling in love with wine.
This is in California?
This is in California. Yeah. We grew up in Monterey, and so we met him there. And as I, got older, and my brother as well, he started to introduce us to wines. And I mean, when I say that, I mean, he would say, okay, I know you don't understand what this is, but we're going to stand in your dingy apartment kitchen when I was still in college, and I'm going to pour you a vertical of Calera. This is like one of those foundational moments that I remember. And wow, now I look back on that and I'm like, what was he thinking? Sharing those wines with people who couldn't possibly have understood what those wines were.
But he loved you. And
but
that
he
was
did.
Like, it was his love language.
That was absolutely his love language. And I think he was deriving so much joy from learning. And he was a teacher by nature. And he just wanted to share what he was discovering with somebody. And he didn't have a lot of people in his life. He was like a scientist. He was a physics professor who socially was a little bit awkward. And so I think he saw us and he thought, these are my students for my new passion. And so at a very young age, he started sending me wines. And when I first met Grant, he came over to my apartment for dinner for the first time. And I was like, go grab us a bottle of wine in the basement or whatever. And there was a case of mixed wines that my Uncle Bob had sent. And there was some Chateau Montelena in there. And he was like, what in the world? And I credit Uncle Bob for making me a viable dating partner for my now husband at the time, because I happened to have wines I had no right having. And I think he thought me a more serious wine drinker than I was, or wine buyer potentially.
So Chateau Montelena was the first bottle that you and Grant opened together?
So actually it was really funny. We opened a Kistler Chardonnay that was completely turned by the time we opened it. Uncle Bob didn't always drink things in a timely manner. So it wasn't the first wine we opened, but it was part of what was in that original box.
It's really funny that is the first story you told, because one of the first questions I was going to ask you was if you could kind of describe the circumstances under which you and Grant met, not because you're like defined by your partner in any way, but like I love that story of when Grant was chasing you down and you were like, here's my rules. You know? I think about that a lot. I'm like, what would Renee do?
No, people don't do this now. So I'll backtrack for our listener. That in the early days, I was 33 when we first started dating, and he was already on the wine path.
And he was a little bit younger.
So he's depends on what a little bit is to you. I guess he's 7 years younger than I am. So at the time, it was a lot because I was a grown-ass woman. And we just laugh about it now because his parents were still, I think, paying his car insurance. So this was a big gamble. It's a real big gamble. And
you'd grown up in the same town and knew of each other.
Yeah, we knew of each other. We were his sister was a good friend of mine. And so we had sort of chased each other around a little bit, but we're never single at the same time.
Yeah.
And then we finally became single-ish at the same time. It's a complicated story. And started dating, and literally on the first date, real date, he said, I just need to put this out there. Like, would you ever consider moving into the country somewhere, planting some grapes, making some wine? And I said, I could conceive of doing that. How do you feel about having children in the next 5 years? Because I'm 33, y'all. And he said, yeah, I could do that. And then the joke is that we like shook on it, and then that carried forward. Yeah. But I think more than anything, to me, it's a story of just knowing that we knew what the non-negotiables in our life were. For him, he wanted 100 Suns to happen someday. He wanted to farm. He wanted to make his own wine. And he wanted somebody who also wanted that. And I, at that point, wasn't sure what was happening with my career. I was a high school teacher at the time. And the one thing that I knew with certainty was that I wanted to have a family. And so I think that desire to constantly value check ourselves has been part of what makes us good business partners too. Yeah. You know, there are so many decisions that you make together when you're in a business. I don't have to tell you this. Mm-hmm. That at least if you know what the non-negotiables are, what the real core value is that you're trying to accomplish, you at least have a target, you know what I mean? And I think it was really important for us to be open about what those core values were for us individually at the time. And sometimes we have to like value check ourselves as we're growing this business. Is that in keeping with what we're actually trying to do here?
I respect that so much because I think women especially have a really hard time advocating for themselves, whether it's in a romantic relationship, a friendship, partnership with coworkers. We go along with things because it's just like easier to, or we want to please people, or we think that it's what that male wants, whether it's our boyfriend or our husband or our boss, and I just really, and then you end up resenting the other person.
Oh my goodness.
And so I really respect just like right out front. I think, then you would have not wasted 5 years of your life or something if you're like, oh, we want different things. Yeah. I don't want to move out to the country and he doesn't want kids.
It literally took me getting to the very bitter edge of that, where I knew that I didn't have time to mess about anymore. And I had to be really explicit because I had made those mistakes in the past. Mm-hmm. And so it's one of those things where, you go through hardship, and at the end of the day, that was something that I needed to live to learn. Yeah. And it's been a really good lesson for me, and something I talk to a lot of people about, as they're, especially romantically. It's like, do you want the same thing? Let's make sure. Yeah. Because if not, it's going to be problematic.
I heard something a long time ago. It was like men date women because they think they'll never change, and women date men because they think they can change them. Mm-hmm. Yep. And I think a lot of us are like, no, that won't always be like that. Right. And you're like, maybe just flip that thinking first.
Just accept and love what you have in front of you, and also hope for the best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and so it's interesting you started with the story about Uncle Bob, because from my understanding, wine was Grant's dream first. It's interesting hearing that wine was a part of your life, especially as you were in your teens and college years. But did you ever think of it as your life or your profession before Grant came along? Because Grant was like, wine is me,
100%. And I think you're actually tapping into something, especially for this particular, for what the core of this podcast is in terms of women, that I think there are actually a lot of us out there who have fallen into this role because our partners have this thing, and sometimes that's great. And often it works out. I definitely had a love for wine before, but it wasn't in the back of my head somewhere. I was like, and someday I want to be the mistress of a winery. I didn't have that. But when I met Grant, that it pretty quickly became a topic of conversation with us, that I came back, and even when we moved to Oregon, I continued to teach and to work in education. Mm-hmm. But even when we were living up here in Portland, there was always this conversation. What do you think? Are we ready to start this thing? Are we ready? Are we ready? And every couple years we would check in, because I think he wanted to earn his stripes too. He wanted to know that he was ready to break out before he took that leap.
But you were always planning on at some point jumping in and being part of the operation?
I think once we got married and moved up here, or that reversed that order, it became clear that was gonna be in some small way part of the equation. And as a person who was very defined by their career before, to do that, it was very conflicting for me as a woman. For exactly the reason that you're saying, wait, so I'm going to give up my career to pursue your dream? Is that what it is? And I think that I had 2 little kids. The life that we were living was unmanageable.
With you being a teacher and him being a winemaker.
And he was gone so much. We were living really far away from where he was making wine. That the idea of moving out to the country, having a little bit of a simpler life, being able to spend more time with my kids, which is, I sort of thought where that was going, which turned out to be completely the opposite of that.
The life of a winemaker will be so much more relaxing.
When we made 450 cases, it was pretty great that first year. There wasn't a lot for me to do. I was like, I'm down with this. As it's grown, obviously, it's become a lot more, of a sort of lifestyle.
Was there a moment or a bottle or an experience that you were like, oh yeah, I could see, that you started to fall in love with it of your own accord, where it started to be your personal relationship with wine?
Yeah, and in fact, I think it goes all the way back. I don't know if you know this, but when we first moved to Oregon, it was 2006. And I had a California teaching credential, but not an Oregon credential. And so I couldn't teach right out the gates.
Oh.
And so, but we were in that in love period. Honey, it's never ended. That where we could not be apart from each other. And he had moved here for a job, and I was like, I'm just coming.
Yeah.
And I came, and he was like, you should work a harvest. It'd be fun. You don't have another job. It was like I moved. It was harvest time. So I worked at the Carlton Winemaker Studio with Patrick Reuter.
Oh my gosh.
From Dominio 4, and I did a harvest with him.
I did not know
So that was right out the gate.
And Grant was there also because he was with Homaker.
He was working at the Carlton Winemaker Studio with Eric Homaker. And so he was there, thank goodness.
So you were like in the building, but not necessarily.
We were in the building, but not working for the same winery. And that was very formative for me. You know, Patrick obviously is an incredible person, and his approach to winemaking is really special and unique. And I was the only intern. He was making the Bryce wines at that time because Bryce had passed away not too long before that. And he was also making wine for Kevin and Carla Chambers. So at that time, I came in and I was the only intern on the ground, and I didn't know anything. And so it was great.
You've never even
Grant
seen a harvest before,
Never
right?
seen a harvest, never operated anything. And I think, you know, back to sort of the female part of that, I think we take for granted that, like, especially because I'm a little bit older, when I was growing up, it wasn't like my dad was inviting me to put my head under the car hood and use a lot of tools.
Your dad was doing that.
My dad was not doing that. My dad had passed away when I was really young, but there was just not a lot of that. So I was even, you know, more extremely, I had a single mother. And so it wasn't like I was great at problem solving mechanical failure and engineering things. I just didn't have any exposure to that. And so when you are in a winery and somebody says, go over there and turn on the water, and you go over to the spigot, and you've never seen a water spigot that has levers like that, you take for granted that stuff is not a no-brainer for people who have not been exposed to it. And so there was a huge learning curve for me during that harvest, but I loved it.
Cool.
And I think what I loved was the physicality of it, the artistry of it, the connection to nature. All of those things rolled into one was really exciting for me.
And so when you went back to teaching, that seed was already planted in your head a little bit that maybe I could come back to this someday.
Totally.
What subject did you teach in high school?
I taught English.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. How long did you teach?
Let's see. I got my teaching credential in 2000, and so I taught 6 or 7 years in California, 6 years in California, and then I came back up here and I taught for a few more years here, and then ended up working in the North Clackamas School District as running in a more administrative role, running their teen parent program there, the academic side of that, which was really special.
Yeah. What were what did you love about teaching? And are there certain skill sets that you developed that you feel like you use now in every area of your life?
Oh my gosh. Of course, like everything you do, as you know, it's whether you realize it or not, creeps into whatever it is that you do next.
Yep.
And so I think what I loved most about teaching was passing on whatever love I had for what the literature that we were reading, or for just the process of writing. I love to see that spark catch with other people, with young people who maybe hadn't been introduced to certain kinds of literature before. So I love to see that turn on. And I just like connecting with people. And I think...
And all that is very applicable when you're selling wine, telling the story of these vineyards, these grapes.
It's 100% part. And in fact, we host all of the tastings for Hundred Suns, either Grant or myself, because we don't have any employees. And a lot of times in the middle of tastings, people will be like, what did you do before you did this? And I'll say, I was an English teacher. And they'll be like, of course. And, you know, and when I was younger, I was a dancer and did some acting and things when I was younger. And so it was like that being on stage was sort of that exciting and fun. And so, you know, hosting tastings, it is very much like teaching in some ways, or you're hoping to ignite a spark in somebody, even if it's just for a bottle of wine that you're really excited about. But I think one of the things that we're trying to do is to reach out to people who are like just having the seed of interest in wine, and try to bring them in and say, this is a wine that's really approachable right now and exciting and fun. And, you know, let it be, hopefully have that wine be a kind of spark for them going forward.
I always think of Hundred Suns wines as being like this perfect balance of sophistication and approachability. And I think it's very reflective of who you and Grant are as well. Like Grant has worked at some very pedigreed places, and you were an English teacher, and like you can talk, you know, the high level sophisticated wine talk just as easily as you can be drinking a beer on the back porch,
which
covered in mud.
Enjoy.
Yeah, like really approachable. And do you think that has played into why Hundred Suns has like exploded in the way it feels to me like it's really exploding onto the stage? And finally, I mean, I'm sure you're like, oh, it's taken 10 years, but like everyone knows your name now, and suddenly you're getting these amazing scores and getting, which I know shouldn't matter, but does it feel validating? I guess it's two questions in one. Does it feel validating to finally be getting this recognition? And do you think it's part of like an intentional thing you've curated of being like approachable and high level?
100% in the approachable category. I mean, I think we're always saying that we're intentionally, we love to drink young wines too. So that's like, I don't know whether that's like a winemaker, like predisposition. Probably not. But I think when wines are young and you're drinking them, you can have a shot at sort of understanding the process a little bit more than you can when wines are way down the road for me. Mm-hmm. And so I enjoy drinking. And we always call it drinking the sunshine. It's like you want to taste the wine when you can sort of feel the sunshine on it a little bit and then experience it. And my Uncle Bob was like the classic teacher of wine in so many ways. But one of the things that he would do is he didn't buy a lot of different wines. Mm-hmm. He was a avid reader of The Advocate, mm-hmm. and he consumed it all. And then he made a few choices every year, and he bought a case of each.
Wow.
And his theory was that he wanted to have a relationship with that wine over time. Mm-hmm. That you can drink a bottle of wine in one moment in time and understand it at that moment.
Yeah.
But how exciting to try to remember what that wine was like in its infancy and then track it through its adolescence and into its middle age and then into its sort of geriatric, no, just kidding, into its wiser years.
Yeah.
And so I think we liked the idea that our wines can be enjoyed in that first moment and also hold the line and hold up over time, so that you can kind of have a relationship with it instead of waiting for 10 years for it to be drinkable. And also we're impatient, so we just...
And maybe people underestimate how difficult that is to do, because I think that is actually pretty advanced winemaking, to be able to make a wine that can taste just as good when it's young, that can taste approachable when it's 2 years old, and also taste delicious 10, 15, 20 years down the line.
I think that's Grant's superpower for sure, is being able to capture that. And I think he's been working really hard for a long time at figuring out that particular alchemy.
How has walk us through like the early days of Hundred Suns and what your role looked like then versus what your role looks like now, 9 years later? Yeah,
and I think actually it's really important from that. It's like to go back to that question about, you know, sort of my struggle as a person who identified as like a strong, career-oriented woman, to go and decide to give that up and pursue something that was with him. And I think the best thing that could have ever happened is what happened, which is that we had no money. And so that meant we had to start really small. We sold a house in Portland here and at the top of the market. In 2015, we bought this tiny fixer-upper in McMinnville that was like needed to be completely torn up. It was so outdated. But we bought that house and we took everything else in between and we saved what we thought was 3 years worth of capital for barrels and fruit and, you know, custom crush fees.
And he's still working at Flanner at this point?
He was working at Beaufrere the first year we started. He was the winemaker there. And then in 16, he transitioned over and he was at Flanner, but he was there full time the entire time. And so I guess what I mean by that it was a good thing for me was that the business was only going to happen if I was 100% involved and invested in it.
Because you weren't teaching anymore.
I stopped teaching when we moved. And at that point, I was 100% Hundred Suns. And so it meant that I was on the ground bringing in the fruit and managing the fermentations and pressing the wines and topping the wines. And so I was in the cellar.
You were almost like more involved than he was, because he still had another job at the time,
He had a
right?
full-time job. He would go in the early days, and it has continued for 9 years, where he would come in the morning before Beaufrere. He would go to Methven at the time, our first vintage, and he would taste, smell, touch, stick his arms in, do
Methven's
his
a
thing.
vineyard, yeah.
And then he would leave me a Post-it. Okay, here's what you got to do.
Wow.
And so even now into these later vintages, he'll come in before he goes to his day job at like very early and taste through all the fermenters and leave me a Post-it.
So you were basically like learning winemaking almost by yourself.
Yeah, but it's kind of the beauty of also being in Custom Crush was that for the first 5 years we were making wine in conjoined in facilities where there were other winemakers. So that first year I was there, our dear friend Greg was running Methven, and so that's why we decided to go there, because I was like, I need to go somewhere where I can ask somebody how to turn the water on and not feel like a total idiot. And so after that, we had to keep changing spots, but there was always somebody else making wine.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were people to tap into, but it was a very remote learning experience for me.
And largely self-taught in a lot of ways, like self-taught, but then knowing when to ask for help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. And like certainly having no problem, like Jay McDonald was there in that first year and just going up to him and being like, Grant says, does this smell funny? And I'm like, can you smell it and tell me if it smells funny? Like, I don't even know what that means. And so there was this beautiful community of people along the way who also helped me.
I mean, someone was saying, I always, at the end, I'll ask you what you think your superpower is, but I asked someone that the other day and they were talking about their ability to ask for help.
Yeah.
I think it was Sam Cole Johnson. She was like, my superpower is I ask all the questions and I ask for help all the time. And I know it's like, I'm not sure that Grant is like this, but a lot of men don't like asking questions or, asking for directions. And I do think that like, I would say that about myself too. Like, I have no problem saying, I have no idea how to do this. Can you help me?
Yeah.
And I think it's a great way to learn. Hearing you talk about the way you learned winemaking, I was homeschooled when I was little. I don't know if you know that. My parents were hippies.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually didn't really have a teacher. Like, my dad would be busy all day and he would leave me like a homework assignment. And it would be like, read these chapters and then do these problems. So I would just like basically teach myself. Yeah. And if I had a question, I would go find him and ask him. But I've never heard of someone kind of like learning winemaking that way too, which makes me respect you all the more.
I mean, I want to like be pretty clear here that I consider myself still a great executor, but that Grant still is the one with the knowledge and the acumen and the palate. But I think what's kind of nice is that I come to it with like a layman's perspective in some ways, because I wasn't a trained winemaker. Mm-hmm. And so, and this is also maybe a personality trait about the way certain people drink and approach wine. There are people who are collectors of things, and they're the kind of people who have that categorical memory, where I'm thinking of my high school friend, Mark Brimehorst, shout out Mark, where like he could tell you the album name, every song on every track, the order in which they came out. And there are people who have that talent with wine. And I'm just like, if it's got a good beat, I'm going to shake my ass. Like, that's it. That's kind of how I approach it.
That's a left brain, right brain thing. And I wonder if there's ever been a correlation between like men and women, because I'm the same way. And I heard that left brain is the less analytical one, right?
More creative, I think.
Yeah, and right brain's more, I think that's it. But someone was saying like, if you remember the lyrics to songs, you're right brain. If you remember the melody, you're left brain. And like, that's me. Right. I don't know all my favorite songs. I could not tell you the lyrics, but God knows I sing along, And I wonder if there's some correlation between men and women. Because I've asked a lot of female winemakers this on the podcast, that like often when I talk to women who make wine, they talk about wine making in a very intuitive way.
Yeah.
Whereas men often, they can lean more on like, this is my recipe.
Talking about the TA.
Yes. But I have, that being said, I've heard you describe Grant as a very intuitive winemaker.
Yeah, I was just going to say that.
Do you think he's unusual in that regard?
I do. And it's kind of interesting because he's dyslexic.
Is he really?
Uh-huh. Huh. And I think my mom and I used to talk about this. She was an English teacher. She would say, your dyslexic kids are often your most creative kids. They're the kids who are incredible at writing poetry. They're often just incredibly artistic, and Grant falls into that category. And so I think that neuro difference, he's an incredibly artistic and creative person, but he is very intuitive. And so he's not leaning a ton on the numbers. Yeah. He's tasting things, he's smelling, he's feeling it. And so he's really the only person outside of Patrick who I've ever worked with. And so that's all I know.
Yeah.
Is to do things like that.
To really like trust your gut, trust your senses, and rely more on that than whatever the numbers say on a page. Yeah.
And he is very generous about taking into consideration the way I feel about wines, especially now as we've grown. But I think, back to that origination story and how it happened, I think I would have had real reservations about having given up what my profession and jumping on board. I think later down the line, I would have had some feelings about it because it would have been obviously so associated with him.
Yeah.
He was the winemaker. He was the person that people knew. Well, when we started Hundred Suns, it was a conflict of interest for him to be in the market. And so the reality was that I was the one that was making connections with people. I was the one that was delivering the wines. I was the one tasting people on the wines. And so in a weird way, in those first years, I felt really identified with the brand. And I needed that to feel like
you belonged.
It was mine, and not me supporting his.
Yeah.
And so now I think that journey has put me in this place where now he's 100% at Hundred Suns, and he's way more on the ground with his hands in the fermenters.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that, but I'm really glad that it started the way it did.
Yeah.
For that reason.
That makes total sense. And I mean, are you still the one running, what is your role now? If he's there more doing the hands-on stuff, are you still very involved in production, or have you leaned more now towards the marketing, the sales, the distribution?
Right. I think as the business has grown, certainly the amount of time that I spend in the back end has grown. And so now I'm doing a lot more of that. And because we've had no money, we are still in that place where we do everything ourselves. So literally I'm packing every box and shipping label, and I'm paying the bills and dropping wine off. This morning I was dropping wine off at accounts here in the city.
Got a car full of wine right now.
It's still there's more still to do on that end than I know what to do with. So yes, I pulled back because we've also hired interns. We've started hiring younger, more able-bodied people to do that work. But I'm also find that I miss it. And I think we're going to need to have conversations going forward about how to, and this is a me thing too. I need to figure out how to delegate some of that back end stuff so that I can still be in the cellar, because I really missed it this year being on the ground.
Yeah. What do you enjoy most about the whole, now that you've worked kind of a little bit of everything in the wine world, and you two are doing the jobs that a larger scale winery would have a team of 20 people split up. If you think 10 years in the future, 2 years in the future, what do you want to be focusing on?
The bookkeeping. JK! Just definitely not that. I really want to dive more into QuickBooks. No, I think that is I want to learn more about the vineyard going forward. I think part of what's happened as a result of Grant having a day job and also sort of being the person who could teach me those things is that he hasn't actually had the time to. And I haven't had the time to be more autodidactic about it. And so I'm looking forward now to having a time where we can be spending more time in our own tiny vineyard that have replanted and are now going to start farming. I really want to lean more into that. And I don't want to let go of as much cellar stuff as I did this harvest, for sure.
Yeah.
But I think the things that I enjoy, I actually love working the wholesale market because I'm going to go and deliver wine to Arden, and I'm going to see people that I really love. And I did it twice today, and that is really fun for me. and I enjoy it.
Yeah.
In a way that I never thought would be possible.
Yeah.
But I also really enjoy the solitude of the cellar.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed that we had our own place and that there were often days where it was just me in there.
This is in your new space?
In our new space. Like I really like being in the cellar. And those days where I could just be there topping the cellar and just listening to music and doing whatever. And I think part of what appeals to me about being a small business person is that I'm not great at doing one thing alone.
I mean, do you think that's a female thing that we're just, is it that we get bored easily, or that we just, our brains, we need more stimulation of like doing 10 things at once?
I don't know. But I mean, if you were to ask what my superpower was, I would definitely say that it's the ability to like have a million thoughts in my head at once.
Yeah.
And to multitask. Like that is definitely the thing that I think every day I'm like, oh yeah, I've got like a log of stuff that's like ticking across and that I'm trying to like chip away at. And I'm not always the most effective and efficient at it.
Yeah.
But, I think it's still something that I feel is really helpful.
I also am just thinking, sorry, not sorry, we're going to talk about periods for a second. But have you heard about how, now I've heard some podcasts, I'm like, I need to do this, that, women's are on a cycle over a course of a month where like there's certain distinct, like the first 2 weeks of your cycle, you're actually more primed like a man, like you have less female hormones. And supposedly, it's your follicular phase from like day 1 of your period to ovulation. And you're more like a dude. And if you, from a dietary perspective, like if you want to do cardio, if you want to intermittent fast, if you want to like power through and hustle and like, it's like your get shit done period.
Right.
And then you get to ovulation and it's supposed to be more like celebration, manifestation, connection. You're like sparkling. You like make important things happen and bask in your glory. And then the last 2 weeks, it's more reflective and like things like looking at data, being solitary, like, and I've heard women say like you should be looking at your calendar and planning your month around like, or are you going to host a big dinner party? Do you need to be on camera? Maybe you do that in ovulation.
Oh my God, I love it that people have that much control over their calendar.
I know. That's what I've always come up against.
I'm so sorry. We can't schedule that because I'm not in my follicular phase.
I'm only doing market visits days 14 through 17.
I can barely get a date on the calendar like without considering where I am.
100%.
But
goals
that's
for the
fascinating,
future,
actually.
Cellar
That is
time
really
the
interesting.
Last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Like winemaking. Let's just make harvest happen days 1 through 15. Yeah.
I do think that it's a uniquely female trait that we are really good at having a lot of balls in the air.
Yeah.
And that partly we just like historically have to.
Yeah.
But I definitely think that that's been something that I feel has been helpful.
What about like where your palate is as you kind of like, I mean, you and Grant have been together for so long that I'm sure you've been drinking wine together for a very long time. Do you have different palates? Do you have different wine? Like, have you gotten to a point now where you want to make wine one way and he wants to make wine another?
Well, I think the good thing about that is we do have different palates. But I think that the good thing is that part of a result of not having a bunch of money when we started this thing and buying a huge estate vineyard that we can then farm is that we're purchasing fruit from all over the Willamette Valley and beyond. And so, what it means is that those vineyards come out with really different personalities. And sometimes the personality of one vineyard, like I love Bednarik, that's this cooler, own-rooted site that has these just incredible, floral aromatics and this red fruit and tends to be a little bit, sort of silkier on the palate versus an Eola Hills site that has a little more structure, a little more black fruit. And so I might lean into the Bednarik and then Grant might lean, I say might, but I mean, just slash that and put does. No, that like, I think he has a higher tolerance for structure than I do.
Yeah.
And so he loves those wines that have that really strong backbone that places like the Eola Hills bring to the table. Yeah. And so, we do have those, but I think because of those multiple sites and being able to produce single vineyard bottlings from them, we're able to sort of tap into that without feeling like we need to compromise.
Yeah.
It's more like a varietal thing where like he's like really into Sauv Blanc. He wants to make Sauvignon Blanc right now.
Oh, interesting.
He wants to make old vine Zinfandel. So we're constantly, I want to make Cab Franc. I'm like, we're in this thing where we're like, what's the next frontier?
Yeah.
And so, we'll have to negotiate
Would you ever do like a, Rhyme in California, they do like his and hers Vermentino?
Well, we've talked about, I think even stylistically in Chardonnay, we have a little bit of a stylistic difference. And so I do like it really lean and sort of tight acidity and minerality. So does he.
Chablis-esque.
But I like it with a little bit more reduction than I think he does. And so we've talked about doing a kind of his or hers version of Chardonnay where maybe not his and hers, but like two different styles.
Yeah.
One where we maybe do some more lees stirring and make a little bit of a, more round-bodied wine. One where we do something that's a little bit leaner, a little bit more reductive, just to show that both of those styles can be delicious.
Yeah. When you guys have really, when you first started, it was it wasn't just, but it was Chardonnay, Pinot Noir.
We didn't even start with Chardonnay. We just did, our first vintage was Sequitur was our first single vineyard. It was Sequitur and Old Eight Cut, and then we did Syrah.
That's right.
Ciel de Cheval,
Love that Syrah. Yeah.
And so we've continued to have, some kind of either Syrah or Grenache in the portfolio, kind of as we feel it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the beauty of having your own thing. You're like, I think I'll make Grenache this year. Like you can, because you're not having to answer to some salesperson who's like, no, everybody's begging for the Ciel de Cheval Syrah.
Yeah.
And so I think we've been able to kind of just like follow where the wind
where you want to go
takes us. And that is a fun exploration. It's why you should have your own thing.
So not to back up, but like, I feel like we kind of glossed over the fact that you, while working full-time as a teacher and Grant was working full-time as a winemaker, like had 2 kids and raised them after moving to a different place. And now that I feel like you played your cards really right, or your timing right, because now your kids are almost teenagers, right?
Yeah, they're 12 and 15.
Now that you're both kind of full-time in, but how did you do that?
I don't know. I mean, any mother alive will tell you, I don't know how I make it through any particular week. It is a Herculean feat. And there are like mornings where we'll get the kids out the door into school. And we'll be going down to the winery together and we're just like high five and like, we did it.
Yeah.
We got them in their shoes and out the door, backpacks, lunches, like they're there. And,
did you have to
I don't know how we did it, but it's a lot.
Did you have to take a couple years off, or did you have to pay for daycare like when they were really young before they were in school?
They were in daycare like right out the gate.
Yeah. You're both working for full time.
And it was painful to do that.
Yeah.
It's really hard. There was actually, I got laid off as a teacher. Something women don't talk about a lot was that I had my son and I was older. I was 40 when I was trying to have my daughter.
Wow.
Actually, I had my son, my first, at 37.
Wow.
The mathematics, Grant and I met and I was 33. So by the time that we had Ty, I was 37. By the time we were trying to have a second, I was 39.
Wow.
And I miscarried 5 times trying to have that baby.
Oh my God.
And it's like a thing that women don't talk about that. And
5 times in between.
In between, because I was really advanced maternal age at that point.
Anything over 35 is geriatric?
Yeah. But it was an important lesson because I had a doctor who said, we're way off topic.
No, this is not. This is women,
I had a doctor who told me here in Portland, you're 40 years old and you're trying to have a baby. You're going to have to muscle up. This was after my first miscarriage. She said, you are going to miscarry a lot more.
Really?
So you need to buckle up, Pooh Bear, and just be ready for that. And eventually you'll probably be successful because you've had one pregnancy successfully. So the reason I want to bring this back is because somehow knowing that made all the difference. Because when it continued to happen, in my head, I was like, this is going to be hard, but I can do this. It is going to be worth it. And just knowing up front, this road is not going to be easy for you. it was a very sort of stealing thought for me.
Yeah.
And so,
And just knowing that there is still hope, no matter how many times,
yeah, this is not a me thing. This is not because I'm doing something wrong. This is because I'm older and this is the way it is. And so I think going into starting Hundred Suns, it's like, I can do hard things. I know this road is going to be hard and it's going to come with a lot of, grind and a lot of sacrifice. And I can do this hard thing and know that at the end, there's going to be something beautiful born from it.
Yeah.
And just sort of knowing up front, like, this isn't going to be easy that's helpful.
Do you, in terms of having a second kid, you had that as the vision, like, that's what I'm going towards, is like the second baby in my arms. But with Hundred Suns, have you and Grant, it sounds like you're such good communicators and like stating what you want up front. Have you talked about like, this is our vision, this is where we want to be in 5 years, in 10 years, this is what we want it to look like, as something to put your flag in the ground and look towards?
Every night over whiskey, baby.
I mean, really?
Literally, it's a conversation, I think, and it has been from the very beginning, about what we wanted. And I think it kind of goes back full circle to that idea that as long as you know what it is that is most important to you, those details will fill themselves in. And so I think for us, the core value is we just want to make wines that are delicious and that people enjoy and that bring people together. That's the goal.
Yeah.
We want to make them be incredible, but also not so expensive that people can't ever afford to drink them or afraid of drinking them.
Yep.
I think we have this idea about wine that it's a thing that we should cherish and we have to save it for the right occasion and we have to put this down. And it's like, I wanted to pop that bottle today because like, I'm here with you and I don't do this every day and we're not going to forget this moment. And if we take a little bit of the pressure off of putting it on this pedestal, then I think it behooves us. And Uncle Bob used to always say it. He's like, it's much more important for you to just pop that bottle with the right people at the right time. You don't have to wait for it.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be special. If it's a Tuesday night and the sun is setting, open it. It's going to make the sunset that much better. I can't remember what we were talking about originally.
No, just the vision for, is there anything now that you feel like, okay, we're both full-time at the winery, the kids are like kind of self-sustainable.
Yeah.
Do you have now like another goal you're working towards? Or are you just like trying to grow the message, grow awareness?
Yeah. So I think that we haven't like landed on what that is, but we know what the value is. Yeah. And so we're kind of figuring out where the next step is. And we have always tried to do it on our own. Like we have not taken investment on so far. We've just it is sweat equity into this thing. And that's been really important for us. Mm-hmm. And so I think that the next thing that is on the horizon is trying to build our own winery. And so we're trying to decide whether that's going to happen at our property in the Eola Hills, or whether it's going to be trying to partner up with somebody who wants to buy a piece of property with us and build a winery. But I think right now we're kind of leaning into the idea of building something small at our property.
When we didn't even talk about this, the fact that you bought a vineyard.
We did.
How many years ago?
So that was in 2018. Okay. And it was an old, pretty phylloxerated site.
Yeah.
But on just like the most perfect piece of dirt that when Grant saw it. I think the old vines, he is a real sucker for own-rooted old vines too. And so the fact that the vineyard looked like a Tijuana dog did not disturb him. And we farmed it for 2 years. And then at the end of the day with those sites, you just realize there's so much emotional energy and financial energy and time that when your yields are so low, you just can't. And so we pulled that out and replanted it. And so right now we have kept a space unplanted to potentially build a winery.
Cool. So, and you're finally getting fruit from those vines, right?
We're not.
Not yet?
We're not. I mean, conversation number, we're spindling off, but it's, when we planted that vineyard, replanted it, we didn't irrigate it, which in hindsight we should have, because back in the day you could hand water vines in a vineyard that was only 3 acres. Yeah. And our reality in Oregon now is that we have these summers that are all hitting over 100 degrees for really sustained periods of time. And these vines are just having a very hard time establishing as a result of that. And so after kind of putting all of this energy into that, and I mean, like we had our kids out on a tractor trying to hand water that vineyard so often, we're finally to the point where we're like, okay, I think we're going to need to irrigate this now in order to get it established. And now that Grant's kind of more on the ground, we'll have more attention to spend there. Yeah.
If people want to learn more about the winery, follow along, join the wine club, can they follow on social media? Like, what's the best way to stay in touch with you guys? Join the newsletter?
Yeah, I'd say I'm not a huge like an email writer, but we send emails when we are releasing new wines or have big things going on. And so a great way to stay in touch is to just subscribe to the email newsletter, because I don't have the time or energy or desire to bomb you constantly with emails, but you will get them when they're important. And then we also have a little Instagram, 100 Suns Wine, that you can follow also.
And everyone can go visit you in McMinnville at your wonderful little tasting
You
room.
can make an appointment and come visit us. And it feels like a bygone era. Like, I think the beauty of Oregon right now is that you can go to some incredible wineries that have beautiful views of, vineyards, and you can see for days and drink beautiful wines in an incredible setting. Or you can come to our industrial warehouse and drink beautiful wines and look at the parking lot. But we will really show you a good time.
Oh, the company. I'll take company over view.
Is top notch.
Well, thank you so much for being here. We didn't even mention, but Arden is doing a barrel of Pinot Noir with you guys this year, which we're
already.
super excited about.
Really fun.
So I'm sure we'll be sending lots of people your way. But thank you so much for being here.
It is absolutely my pleasure.